Plato's Cosmology. Plato takes the universe to be governed by a principle of rational order. In the Philebus, he takes the motion of celestial objects to indicate the evidence of a wondrous regulating intelligence. So we see here an argument by design. In the Timaeus, he presents his account of the creation and order of the world. Now, Plato does note that it's very difficult to present a consistent and detailed account of the origins of the world, and he claims that the best we can do is create what he calls a likely story. So what is his design argument? The argument works like this. According to Plato, everything that becomes or is created must, of necessity, be created by some cause. Given the size and complexity of the world, this cause must be sufficiently powerful and intelligent. This creator is, in Plato's terminology, the Demiurge, translated out sometimes as the craftsman. Now, in some translations this is translated as God, but this is not sort of the standard god of monotheism. Why not? Well, Plato's Demiurge is not omnipotent. It's not all-powerful. So that's a major difference. The standard monotheistic god is presented, at least by philosophers, as being all good, all-powerful, omnipotent, and all-knowing, omniscient. And the Demiurge of Plato is not all-powerful, has limits on its power. Another big difference is that Plato's Demiurge does not create the world ex nihilo, that is to say, from nothing. Now, in many versions of monotheism, God is the creator of everything. So there's God, nothing else, and then God creates everything from nothing. But Plato's Demiurge doesn't do this. So it's not the creator in the sense of creating everything from nothing, but it is the designer of the world. Now, the design argument, as you might suspect, later gets developed once Christianity, monotheism, etc. arises, to arguments for the monotheistic God, or the various interpretations of that. And then it becomes, an argument which has very similar structure, essentially that everything requires a cause. Given the complexity of the world, there must be a sufficiently complex designer. This designer must be God. God therefore exists. And that's the sort of monotheistic version. But again, two distinctions for Plato. For his Demiurge is, the Demiurge is not all-powerful and does not create the world ex nihilo, that is to say, out of nothing. So, what does the Demiurge do? Well, in addition to the Demiurge, Plato also has raw material, which he calls, translated into English, of course, the receptacle. And the receptacle is formless and chaotic. And what the Demiurge does is creates the world based on the forms. So, to use an analogy, one obviously Plato wouldn't be aware of, think of like a 3D printer. And the Demiurge is the printer. And the raw material is the plastic that gets spooled into it. And when you load, a model into the 3D printer, that would be analogous to the form. So, not a terrible analogy would be that the Demiurge is pulling in the raw material, the receptacle, and then shaping it in accord with the forms and producing various objects. So to use a metaphor, or the analogy of the 3D printer, you get a 3D printer, you want to print like a little plastic cat. So you load in the file for cat, you spool on the plastic, and then you've got a cat. And so with the Demiurge, what it would do is it would load in the receptacle and, I guess, uplink to the form of, say, a planet and, put out the planet. So why did the Demiurge do what it did? Well, according to Plato, it ordered the world because it is good. So it does have a similarity to one view of the monotheistic God, namely the Demiurge is also good. Now, being good, according to Plato, it lacks jealousy. Lacking jealousy, it would want all things to be as much like it as it could make them. So it tries to make things as good as possible. And here we see the beginnings of what later is known in monotheism as a problem of evil. Now, Plato has a clear answer to the question of why aren't things perfect, and his answer is, well, the Demiurge is working with the forms, which are perfect, but it has to create things out of the receptacle, which is formless and chaotic. So essentially, bad building material to work with. And so the Demiurge is doing the best it can, but it's not all powerful, and it's working with substandard building material, imperfect building material. And so you're going to get defects. Now, this becomes a problem for those who take God to be all good, all powerful, and all knowing, because being all good, like the Demiurge, he should want to make things as good as possible. But being all powerful, God, of course, could make everything as good as it could be, could eliminate all evil. And being all knowing, he'd know exactly how to do this. And so the problem of evil, which kind of arises with Plato, which he solves very easily, becomes a very deep thorn in the side of the monotheistic thinkers who take evil seriously. Now, Plato believes that the philosopher acts from the same motive as the Demiurge. Their love of the forms leads the philosopher to try to make the state, the government and other people like the forms. So as Plato sees it, he attributes a very altruistic motive to philosophers, that they're trying to make everything as good as possible. Is that true? Perhaps in some cases, but perhaps not in all. So Plato presents a dualistic world, and he says the world is a living creature. Why? Because the Demiurge, according to Plato, imparts some of its nature onto the universe. And the universe, for Plato, is a harmonious whole. And it is analogous to us. If you believe that we have a soul, we would have a body and a soul. And for Plato, the universe also has this dualism. It is a physical body, the material imperfect world, and an invisible soul. And according to Plato, this gets into some funky metaphysics. Of course, it's all kind of unusual. The soul of the world has a special function. It mediates between the forms and Demiurge and this physical, imperfect world. And so the obvious parallels, to religion, pretty clear there. Now, also unlike the monotheistic God, which is said to have created everything, the Demiurge starts the process, but it doesn't finish it. In fact, the process presumably doesn't finish unless the universe ends. Because according to Plato, the soul of the world keeps creating things, this ongoing creation. And so you have a dualistic world. The world is the body, then the invisible soul, just like, at least on some versions of Plato's Metaphysics, because he's got quite a few, people have bodies and souls. So what he's presenting here is what philosophers call a teleological world, from the Greek word telos, meaning goal or end. So the world is explained in terms of a meaningful order, and the critical part is it's got a purpose behind it. And this is why it's teleological. Now, oversimplifying things, putting it to like bumper sticker, or like internet tweet terms, put it very, very concisely, there's kind of two general views about the world in this regard. One is the teleological view. Crudely put, everything happens for a reason. In other words, a purposeful world. The other would be, of course, stuff happens. There's no purpose or meaning. Things just occur. And of course, the actual views are much more complicated than that. But that's a pretty basic distinction in philosophy and metaphysics, and also in views of the nature of reality. Do things happen for reasons, the purpose or goal, or does stuff just happen? Now, Plato believes that there's a purpose to the world. And to explain the world just based on the physical world, he thinks, would be lacking. Now, As I mentioned before, I talked about the problem of imperfection, because for Plato, you could later cast it as a problem of evil, but his problem is not why is there evil, the question is why isn't the world perfect? And the answer is this, which I kind of gave before. So the order and perfection of the world is explained by the forms. So the degree to which the world is ordered, to the degree to which it approaches perfection, which is not terribly far, that's accounted for by the forms. The disorder of the world arises from chance that's inherent to the receptacle. Now he takes this force of disorder to be necessity or variable cause. That is that it's a cause without a purpose or rationality, a random cause. So the world for Plato is a result of, a bit of a metaphor I suppose, of the Demiurge persuading the receptacle and making necessity subject to reason. So essentially the forms ordering random chaos. And one way to think of it is kind of like, to use another analogy, it's kind of like it's making things, but it's also randomizing, like rolling dice, to see how closely it resembles the perfect form. To use an analogy, familiar with games where you create a character randomly by rolling, it'd be kind of like that. You would roll to see what you get in terms of your abilities. And so, for example, all humans would be based on the form human, but using the metaphor, we'd kind of be rolling dice to see how closely we come to the ideal human, which explain why there are people who are like, stronger, faster, etc. Now, the imperfection of the world, again, arises from this disorder, which is a matter of necessity. It's a random cause. So what are the implications of imperfection? Well, the visible matter, the stuff we observe around us, resists order. So, because it's chaos by its nature. So the physical world can never be perfect. So, because it's resisting order. Also, the presence of randomness means the physical world is never fully intelligible because of randomness, all this chance. So he solves the problem of evil this way. Beauty, goodness, and order are from the forms. So all the defects and evil stem from the matter. And again, Plato has got a perfectly reasonable, coherent work around here. Because in his creation story, his creator is an imperfect being that's doing the best it can with substandard material, basically defective matter. And so that's where the defect comes in. The Demiurge doesn't create this matter. It's always been and always shall be. It's just working with what it's got. To use an analogy, if you were hired, to build a, some student housing, and the person who contracted you also contracted someone to supply the material, and the people working for you are all really good, professional, super competent, but the person they contracted the materials to, they're not so good. They cut all kinds of corners, so you get bad cement, you get bad materials. You're doing the best you can, but it's not your fault that the building is not as good as it could be because the other person shortchanged the job. And so you have a way out. It's not your fault. You did the best you could. Now, once you bring in God doing everything, then God is the builder and the person providing the materials. So can't make the argument that I'm not to blame for the materials, because if God creates it all, then he's responsible for all of it. And later thinkers like our good dead friend Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz and others tried to solve this problem, which seems to have arisen with Plato. So that takes us to the end of Plato's Cosmology. We'll move on next to some classic problem with the forms, but for now, stay safe, and I'll see you in